Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to my complete and detailed Lauma guide. Lauma is the brand new and first 5-star character from Nod-Krai, the newest region. Lauma is a very powerful Dendro support and on-field driver who focuses around the lunar-bloom reaction, and in today's video we're going to cover everything you need to know about Lauma, her best builds, weapons, artifacts, teams, constellations, and much more. Before we begin, I want you guys to know that I do stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested, and also keep in mind that some of the footage you're seeing is from the creator experience server, which allowed me to get you guys this information out earlier than I otherwise could have. With that said, this video did end up coming out a lot later than expected, so I'd like to apologize for the delay. While a lot of effort did go into the video, it definitely should have been out a lot sooner, and I will make sure to get my next character guide for Flins out at least a bit closer to his release. With that out of the way, let's get straight into it and talk about Lauma. Alright, so starting things off, let's talk about what Lauma actually does. Firstly, Lauma is a character who introduces a brand new reaction, lunar-bloom. In fact, when you trigger bloom on any character in your party, it will be converted to lunar-bloom provided that Lauma is in the team. This lunar-bloom will effectively act the same way as bloom, with one key difference being that it produces a verdant dew when it is triggered. In fact, all you need to know about lunar-bloom is the following. When you trigger it, two things will happen. One, there will be a dendro core that you can then bloom, hyperbloom, or burgeon, and two, there will be a dewdrop that is created. Now keep in mind that while there are ways to do direct lunar-bloom damage, like through Lauma's skill that we'll cover, and this damage will be increased by Lauma's passive with an amount scaling on her elemental mastery, the lunar-bloom reaction itself that you will be triggering through your party when you're mixing dendro and hydro will produce a dendro core that will do the exact same thing, the exact same damage as a normal dendro core. There's effectively no difference between bloom and lunar bloom outside of producing the verdant dew that I mentioned earlier. This means that when the dendro core explodes, it will do bloom damage, not lunar bloom damage, or hyperbloom with electro and burgeon with pyro. Now, I'm taking the time to clarify this so that you can understand what lunar bloom actually does. The reaction itself will just create a dendro core like a normal bloom reaction, behaving the same way and not dealing extra damage of its own, but while generating these verdant dew stacks for your Lauma that we will explain as we dive deeper into her kit to actually understand the point of it. Firstly, her elemental skill is an ability that you can tap or hold, and will create a sort of dendro field around you where deers will rain down, dealing AoE dendro damage for some genuinely good dendro application, as well as a bit of damage and some energy generation. If you hold the ability, however, Lauma will consume all the verdant dews that she has, which you can see under the party section to the right of your screen, with a maximum of 3, and she will deal 2 hits of dendro damage, with the second one being considered direct lunar bloom damage, and this hit actually has a good scaling, dealing more damage the more verdant dews you consumed. A verdant dew can be generated up to once every 2.5 seconds, and typically you'll have no problem generating all 3 reliably to maximize the damage from your Lauma's hold skill, as you will be generating them passively as you're triggering the bloom reaction on any character in your team. Now this skill dealing direct lunar bloom damage does make it pretty unique, as it will have a unique damage formula scaling with Lauma's elemental mastery and crit, but not her damage bonus, which is why we won't be, for example, talking about a dendro damage bonus goblet in this video. Now outside of that, Lauma's skill will also decrease the dendro and hydro res of enemies that it hits for up to 25% at talent level 10. This is genuinely really good because not only will it increase the damage of your dendro reactions like bloom, hyperbloom, and burgeon, but it will also increase the damage of any of your dendro damage dealing characters, as well as hydro DPSs or supports as well. This form of res shred to 2 elements is incredible, and it also has really good uptime of 10 seconds when an opponent gets hit by her skill, and her skill already lasts for 15 seconds with a 12-second cooldown, and so it effectively has over 100% uptime. For Lauma's elemental burst, this is a very strong ability that will increase the reaction damage of your team for all bloom, hyperbloom, burgeon, and lunar bloom damage. The damage increase will scale with Lauma's elemental mastery, which is really nice as basically all her kit scales with EM, with a 15-second cooldown and a 60 energy cost. More specifically, Lauma's burst will buff a certain number of reaction damage instances, starting at 18, but going all the way up to 36, which will usually always be the number that you're getting. The way you actually get more stacks, though, is by something called Moonsong. You get 6 extra stacks per Moonsong, you can have up to 3, and the way you get them is by holding your Lauma's skill, where each stack of verdant dew she consumes will give her 1 stack of Moonsong. You can get up to 3 this way, which will give you 18 more stacks for a total of 36. I do want to note that Lauma will consume these Moonsong stacks either as she uses her burst if you used your skill before, or even during her burst if you use your skill afterwards. What this means in practice is that you kind of don't really have to worry about it. As long as you're holding your skill, Lauma will gain additional stacks of buffed damage based on the stacks of Moonsong generated from her hold skill. Now with her burst out of the way, there's still some more to talk about. Firstly, Lauma has another passive that will increase her skill's damage based on her elemental mastery, as well as decreasing the cooldown of her charge attack based on her EM, which is cool for exploration as Lauma has a unique charge attack where she turns into a deer and can gallop around until your stamina bar is depleted. Outside of that, Lauma has another passive that is very important. This passive will give you one of two buffs depending on your party's moon sign. What moon sign is a new Nod-Krai mechanic that has two phases, either Nascent Gleam or Ascendant Gleam, with the phase depending on how many Nod-Krai characters you have in your party. Now, it's basically just one or more. If you only have one, you're in Nascent Gleam, so just Lauma as your only Nod-Krai character in your team, or if you have Lauma and another character, so two or more characters from Nod-Krai, then you will be in Ascendant Gleam. Firstly, when you are in Ascendant Gleam, you will get a new form of a pseudo-elemental resonance where you will gain lunar reaction damage to your entire party when a character who isn't from Nod-Krai in your team uses their skill or burst. The way you get this buff will vary based on elements. This is just a new mechanic that you don't really have to worry about, but I thought I should explain it. For the most part though, what you need to know is that for Lauma's passive, you will gain one of two buffs. Firstly, if you're in Nascent Gleam, so Lauma''s the only Nod-Krai character in your party, your Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Burgeon reaction damage will all be able to crit with a fixed crit rate at 15% and a crit damage fixed at 100. This is big because it will effectively increase your reaction damage for these three very important ones by a fairly sizable amount, allowing these transformative reactions to crit. Now, the only other way to do this is through a constellation, namely Nahida's C2, so having this on just a passive talent is honestly pretty crazy. Additionally, in case you're wondering, the crit rate from this passive will stack with crit rates from similar effects like Nahida's C2, which I wanted to mention in case you have it. On the flip side, if you're running two Nod-Krai characters or more and you are in Moon Sign, Ascendant Gleam, then you will lose your Bloom, Hyperbloom, and Burgeon's ability to crit, but will instead gain more crit rate and crit damage to your party's lunar bloom damage. As of right now, this is going to be a downgrade to your overall damage because of the fact that Lauma will typically be played in teams that focus around Bloom or Hyperbloom or sometimes Burgeon, and so just gaining a bit of crit to your lunar bloom damage, which is just Lauma's skill, is not nearly as important as increasing your team's reaction damage, which will usually be a big deal. Now, with that said, that's not the whole story. While yes, as of right now, being in Nascent Gleam is going to be better, there are certain Nod-Krai characters that can make up for your reactions not critting. Inefa, for example, will give you access to Lunar Charge on top of just being a really solid character. Additionally, when you are inside of Ascendant Gleam, certain weapons from Nod-Krai and also artifact sets like both the new supportive and the DPS set that we got in 6.0 will become much better if you are in Ascendant Gleam, so there are still some upsides to this, but more on that later in the video. Primarily though, I do suspect this part of the passive to be more catered towards future units, future characters from Nod-Krai that will synergize with Lauma, a future unit who does lunar bloom damage, potentially a Dendro character like Nefer, but obviously we don't know yet. Outside of that, because Lauma is a catalyst character, while she can be an incredible off-field support, she can also be used as an on-field Dendro applier and driver, a character who can spam her normal attacks, apply a ton of Dendro, and enable some teams from off-field, which is great as it gives her another strong playstyle. Lastly, for Lauma's talent priority, both her skill and burst are going to be very important to level. You can start with her skill as it increases not only her personal damage, but also the Dendro and Hydro res shred that you're gaining, which is very universal and very important. Outside of that, her burst is also great to level, as it will increase the reaction damage buff that Lauma will give your team. Lastly, you can ignore Lauma's normal attacks unless you use her on field, where it's still okay to ignore them because they scale on attack and don't do a lot of damage, but it will add up in the long term, so you can level them as well if you play her on field, but be sure to prioritize your skill and your burst. Now, to quickly talk about Lauma's playstyle, it is super easy, so let's make it brief. Firstly, she's typically just a support who will use both her burst and her skill, but because she's a catalyst, she can also be used as an on-field Dendro driver in teams where you don't have a main DPS. This can be like a Hyperbloom team with two Hydros and an off-field Electro, where Lauma's on field, applying as much Dendro as she can, and in a team like this, and honestly in a lot of her teams like even Bloom, Lauma will have some flexible rotations where you can swap through your team and use your abilities off cooldown if you don't have a dedicated main DPS that you need to be on. This will help you get more value and will allow you to use every ability as soon as possible. This makes Lauma pretty easy and intuitive and also fun to play if you enjoy quick swapping, which personally I find engaging. Outside of that, in your standard teams, Lauma wants to use her hold skill and her burst, and that's basically all you need to think about. Do note though that you want to make sure to have 3 stacks that you are consuming when you use your hold skill in order to get the most damage and the highest buff possible from your burst. While this will be very easy to do over the course of a fight, as you're starting a rotation, if you don't have any stacks, you can either get this by using other characters in your team, or with Lauma, you can start your rotation off by tapping your skill, then swap through your support characters, apply Hydro, Dendro and use your other party members' skills and bursts before swapping back to Lauma, using her burst and then using her hold skill, which will still give you the max amount of stacks and effectively allow you to apply Dendro as you're setting up, trigger Lunar Bloom, and therefore stack her up and get your rotation ready. Do note that in these cases, while you can easily just use your Lauma's skill and then swap out of her, you can also use her burst after tapping your skill if it's available, before swapping through your characters, then going back to her and holding her skill, as using your burst early doesn't really make it lose any value because it has 100% uptime, while also actually extending the duration of the future stacks you gain when you go back to Lauma and hold your skill, because of the fact that the 15-second duration on the new stacks you generate will last for 15 seconds starting from your hold skill, even if your burst were to come off cooldown shortly after. It is worth noting that Lauma can also weave in a normal attack at the start of a rotation if you want to apply Dendro on an enemy and maybe need to trigger an extra Lunar Bloom. So tap skill can be nice to start and set yourself up with Dendro application if necessary, and then outside of that, you're just going to be using your burst and hold skill pretty much as often as you can in a very straightforward and easy way. Flexible rotations are very much appreciated and will be the standard for a lot of your teams unless you have a dedicated on-field main DPS like Nevalette, for example. Overall, Lauma is a character who has a lot going for her with a really incredible kit that buffs Bloom and its sub-reactions, as well as enabling Lunar Bloom. I think that this Lunar Bloom will be more relevant as future characters from Nod-Krai come out that she will directly synergize with if they also Lunar Bloom. Outside of that though, she already works really well in teams focused around Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, or even some other ones, like being an excellent addition to Alhaitham teams, Nevalette teams, or others that we'll talk about in the team comp section. The buff that she gives to Nilou Bloom teams and Hyper Bloom teams is genuinely astounding, as they become a lot more relevant, kind of elevated to the standard that was set by all of the new Natlan characters without being so strong that it dethrones Mawika. These teams aren't broken, they're just really strong. I think Lauma is a great buff to these old teams and also a character that will very likely have synergy with future units. For more information on my thoughts about this character though, do check out my last video about Lauma, but for now, let's leave it at that and let's talk about how to build her. Alright, now that out of the way, let's talk about how to actually build your Lauma. Firstly, for your artifact sets, there's actually a lot of different options, so let me break it down for you as clearly as I can. Firstly, it is crucial for teams that are doing Dendro damage or Dendro reaction damage, so basically any team where you're running Lauma, to have someone in the team on the Deepwood memory set. This is because the 4-piece of the set will decrease the Dendro resistance of enemies by 30%, which makes it incredibly valuable. For those reasons, in a lot of teams, Lauma's best option will be to run the Deepwood memory set if you do not already have it on any other character. And so that is your step one. If you want to keep things simple, this set is a good place to start. Now, if you already have Deepwood on someone else though, there are a few other artifact sets that are good for Lauma that we're gonna talk about. Firstly, there's the Silken Mood Serenade, a new artifact set from Nod-Krai. This set will give you 20% ER on the 2-piece, which is appreciated for her, and then a team-wide buff of either 60 Elemental Mastery if Lauma is the only character from Nod-Krai, or 120 if you have someone else and your moon sign is therefore an Ascendant Gleam. This team-wide EM buff affects Lauma and also your other characters, which makes it very valuable. Outside of that, you will also increase your lunar reaction damage by 10 to 20% right now. It's actually 10% for each different Gleaming Moon effect you have, and Gleaming Moon is something you gain from both of the new Nod-Krai sets, meaning that if you're running just the Silken Moon Serenade, you'll gain 10%, but if you also run the new DPS set as well on another character, then you'll gain 20% in total, which is nice and makes it to where this set is definitely better if you have another character from Nod-Krai, potentially gaining a lot of value as future Nod-Krai characters come out that also synergize with Lauma. For now though, it's a solid set even if she's the only Nod-Krai character in your team, with it obviously being quite a bit stronger if you have another one for a bigger buff. Outside of that, Lauma can also run the Gilded Dream set for just a ton of Elemental Mastery. This is incredibly valuable on her, as EM will not only buff her personal damage but also the reaction buff you're giving your team, as that will scale on Lauma's Elemental Mastery. For those reasons, Gilded Dreams is a solid option if you already have a Deepwood Memories user, and it can potentially be your strongest option in many different teams, especially if you don't have a second character from Nod-Krai. So Gilded Dreams is better than you might expect, as a ton of Elemental Mastery is just great, especially for Bloom. Outside of that, the second Nod-Krai set, Night of the Skies Unveiling, which is the DPS set, can also be viable, as it gives you 80 Elemental Mastery on the 2-piece and either 15 or 30% crit rate on the 4-piece, 15 if you're the only character from Nod-Krai, and 30 if you have another one, which is really when it becomes very strong. This is mainly a set that I recommend if you already have Deepwood and are looking for another offensive set you can run for Lauma that's primarily strong if you also have another character from Nod-Krai in your team, and especially if they already have the Serenade set to buff you, like for example in a Bloom team with Ino, where Ino can be on Serenade and you already have someone else on Deepwood. If you don't have any of the artifact stats I mentioned, then you can consider running a 2-piece of Elemental Mastery for the time being until you get something better. I want to end this section off by reiterating that there really is a lot that you can run, so you can choose based on your substats and what your team needs most, because it will vary heavily. For the most part, your standard go-to supportive sets will be Deepwood Memories and Serenade for most players in most teams, with the other two sets I mentioned also being situationally very strong. Next up, for the stats you want on Lauma, here it's pretty straightforward. Firstly, your number one priority should be to make sure you have enough energy recharge to be able to use your burst consistently. Outside of that, Elemental Mastery will also be a high priority, as basically all of Lauma's kit will scale on Elemental Mastery. This is true for her skills damage, as well as the reaction damage buff that you are giving your entire team through your Elemental Burst. The more EM you have, the more you will increase your team's Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and Lunar Bloom damage, which makes it a very valuable stat for Lauma. Outside of that, crit rate and crit damage are solid stats to get, as well as more of a bonus, something that can be overwhelming to look for on top of EM and ER, but if you can get them on your pieces, then your Lauma will be doing more damage. While Elemental Mastery is the most valuable to increase your team's overall reaction damage, getting crit is the most valuable for your Lauma's skills personal damage, the damage you're doing from your Lunar Bloom. So it's a nice substat that's a bonus amount of damage if you can get it, but it should come after your ER and Elemental Mastery. I'm clarifying this because it can be overwhelming to have to look for like 4 stats on your pieces, whereas in reality, Lauma is a very high value character with just enough energy recharge and Elemental Mastery, and then crit you can view as a bonus that's also useful to just get more personal damage. To go into more details though, for the amount of energy recharge you need on Lauma, here it depends, but it generally is not very high. In fact, around 150 or 140 to 160 should be enough in most of Lauma's best teams. This is because Lauma's oftentimes ran either with another Dendro character or as an on-fielder, or even in a team like with Neuvillette where you can do a longer rotation and therefore have a longer time between bursts, which can allow you to get away without needing the most energy recharge. I did also want to mention that in some more niche and energy hungry teams where Lauma is going to be your only Dendro character and she's also off-field, then Lauma can need more energy recharge than usual, like anywhere from 160 to 200%. Keep in mind that in these teams, while this number looks high, and it is, it can be more manageable than you'd expect by running things like an incredible free-to-play weapon that gives you energy that we'll cover in the next section, as well as giving Favonius weapons to one or more characters on your team if you need more assistance. Generally though, Lauma will not need that much energy recharge, with around 150 being enough to burst once per rotation in most of her strongest teams. With that said, as we saw in a previous section, Lauma can opt for more flexible rotations where she may even be bursting off cooldown at a faster pace in some of these more flexible teams, which makes it to where more energy recharge on your Lauma will allow you to burst faster, potentially every 15 seconds instead of the standard like every 20. And while this is a bit more advanced, basically what I'm trying to say is that in these flexible teams where your rotation is kind of just swapping through your characters and using your abilities off cooldown, having a bit more energy recharge than you usually need can be nice and can translate to more damage if it allows you to burst more often. For those reasons, having some more energy recharge on Lauma is appreciated, but generally for her more quote-unquote standard gameplay where you're just bursting every rotation, then around 150 energy recharge will be enough and you don't have to worry about the rest. Outside of that though, you can just focus on stacking Elemental Mastery, with crit rate and crit damage being solid substats too. For your main stats, you're generally looking for Elemental Mastery on your Sands, Elemental Mastery on your Goblet, and Elemental Mastery on your Circlet. With that said, going for a crit Circlet can be very similar in strength to EM as well, so it's also very viable, giving your Lauma a bit more personal damage at the cost for some reaction damage, but it's another solid option with Elemental Mastery being the standard. Additionally, it is worth pointing out that an energy recharge Sands is viable too if you don't have enough from your substats and or your weapon. Generally though, I think for most players, just having Elemental Mastery main stats and then enough ER from either your weapon or substats will be a very easy way to build Lauma as a very efficient supporting, buffing, and damage dealing character. Alright, now next up for Lauma's best weapons, here once again it is very straightforward. Because Lauma is a character who primarily wants Elemental Mastery and some energy recharge, these are the stats you're going to be looking for. Now, something I'm really happy to say is that Lauma actually has incredible free-to-play options, so much so that you really don't need anything else. Now, with that said, we will first talk about Lauma's signature weapon, Nightweaver's Looking Glass, which will obviously still be her best in slot. This is because the weapon gives you 265 Elemental Mastery just from its stat line, plus another 120 by dealing Dendro damage with your skill and also triggering Lunar Bloom, and afterwards, if you've done that, you will also gain a reaction damage increase to your whole party for Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and also Lunar Bloom. Now, while this all sounds great, and it is your best in slot weapon overall, because Lauma has such incredible, even just free-to-play options, this usually ends up being only around a 7 to 10% damage increase to your overall team's DPS, which is not nearly as much as a lot of the recent signatures we've been getting, on top of it also being a pretty niche weapon for your account. For those reasons, while again, if you have it, you should use it on Lauma, I wouldn't recommend going out of your way to get it, as it doesn't seem to be the most valuable pull-wise, so it's definitely not a weapon that you need by any means. In fact, I'm very excited to talk about the next weapon, the Aetherlight Spinal Loon, which is a free-to-play weapon that we can get and refine for free through an event this patch. This weapon is incredible because at R5, you will get 200 elemental mastery from its effect just from using your skill, and then you will also gain 45% energy recharge from its stat line. Because Lauma is a character that generally needs energy recharge in a lot of her teams, having a weapon that can trivialize your energy recharge requirements on top of also giving you 200 EM, which is genuinely a lot, makes this weapon incredible. It's your best free-to-play option if you can use the ER, and it will be not only your best free-to-play option, but also one of your best options just in general, provided you need the energy recharge. As I said, it's not even far behind your signature, which is really good and healthy and makes it to where you won't feel forced to pull for a better weapon. And generally, I would say that this weapon is basically your go-to outside of your signature. Now, outside of that though, other generic elemental mastery stat sticks are great, and there even are some other free-to-play options if you either don't need the energy recharge or maybe are trying to build your Lauma after the event is already gone. Firstly, 5-star EM stat sticks can all be viable, with Nahita's signature also providing your team with a bit of elemental mastery, which is nice for a bit more reaction damage from whoever's triggering it. Outside of that, the new free-to-play catalyst from Nod-Krai, Black Marrow Lantern, is also pretty good for 221 EM on its stat line, as well as an effect that will increase your personal reaction damage. Now keep in mind though that while this weapon is good and one that I actually used on Lauma in testing when I didn't need the energy recharge from the event weapon, it's worth pointing out that because Lauma isn't the character triggering Bloom in your team, even if you are playing a Nilou Bloom team for example, this makes the Bloom damage you're gaining a bit wasted on Lauma, but the Lunar Bloom increase of 24% or 48 if you're in Ascendant Gleam makes it solid for increasing her skill's Lunar Bloom damage on top of giving you elemental mastery, so it's another just great free-to-play option that I'm delighted to have. Similarly, I wanted to mention Fruit of Fulfillment as another craftable weapon you can use that is basically a budget version of the event weapon, giving you up to 180 elemental mastery from its effect at R5 and the same amount of energy recharge. This means that it's only going to be a bit worse than the event weapon, and so while it wouldn't be worth using over it, if you missed the event or already have this leveled, then it's a perfectly viable option as well that I wanted to mention. Outside of that, Sacrificial Fragments gives you 221 EM, which is solid, on top of also resetting your skills cooldown, which is nice, but not as valuable as it is on some other characters because of the fact that Lauma's hold skill will take some time, 7.5 seconds in fact, to fully charge up and get 3 stacks by triggering Lunar Bloom, so it loses a bit of value there, but it's still useful and a solid EM stat stick. Outside of that, Wandering Evanstar is nice if you have attack scalers on your team, as it will give them some bonus attack, which is appreciated. And while in the past, Magic Guide has been an okay 3-star on EM scalers, now with the release of Black Marrow, which is a craftable weapon at any time that gives you more EM on top of a useful effect, there is effectively no reason to use it. Outside of that, for some more niche weapons that are sometimes useful, Favonius Codex can be nice if your team desperately just needs as much energy as possible, and Thrilling Tales, while it will hurt your overall reaction damage and Lauma's personal damage as well, can be usable in teams where you're trying to just buff a hyper carry by giving them attack, which again isn't really recommended for Lauma but can work, notably with Kniech. Lastly, in teams where you are quickening a lot, some weird stat sticks like even Sacrificial Jade that gives you a lot of crit and elemental mastery at R5 become more viable options to help with your Lauma's personal damage at high investment. With that said though, it's generally not recommended, and focusing on weapons that give you a ton of elemental mastery and useful stats is going to be ideal. And so overall, her signature weapon will be her best in slot, with Aetherlight Spindle Loon being an incredible free-to-play event weapon that I would generally recommend as your second best and just overall most worthwhile weapon if you need the ER, and if you don't, Black Marrow or any of the other EM stat sticks are incredible too. With that said, I usually put an on-screen ranking of each weapon to help give you guys a visual representation of what to go for, which I usually get from my friends at Jeff77. This time, however, he just sent me these messages, but for a visual ranking, here it is on screen now to help give you guys an idea of what you should use. Overall though, it is very straightforward. Obviously her signature is going to be her best, with the event weapon being the standard free-to-play go-to option, with any other catalyst that gives you elemental mastery being very strong too. Alright, now next up, let's talk about Lauma's best constellations. Firstly, Lauma C1 is a weird one. This is a constellation that will heal your active character as you are lunar blooming after using your skill or burst up to once every 1.9 seconds. Outside of that, it will increase how long you can stay inside of your deer farm, as well as making it cost less stamina, which is nice for exploration. Because of this constellation seems like one that's good for quality of life, healing you, and improving exploration. With that said though, it's not a constellation that will directly give you any damage buffs, which makes it seem a bit underwhelming in combat. However, while it doesn't buff your damage directly, there is a chance for it to indirectly increase your DPS if it allows you to replace your healer option in your team for a more offensive one. This could be like replacing Kuki with someone like Raiden, who will trigger Hyper Bloom faster with her skill than Kuki will, or remove a healer in your Bloom team, or even potentially for some future team. As of right now though, it's a weird constellation. Like, I think it's nice for quality of life, the healing is very much appreciated, but again, it's not a source of direct damage, but it can be an upgrade if it allows you to replace a healer and run a more offensive slot, so just keep that in mind. Next up for Lauma's second constellation, this is one that will increase your damage, namely your reaction damage. In fact, Lauma's burst will further increase the damage of your Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and Lunar Bloom reactions based on Lauma's elemental mastery. Outside of that, if you are an Ascendant Gleam, so if you're running another character from Nod-Krai, then all of your party members' Lunar Bloom damage will be increased by 40%. This is overall a solid constellation, a decent team DPS increase to any team that relies on reaction damage, which is almost all of Lauma's teams. With that said, where it does increase your damage even further is in a Lunar Bloom team, which we don't really have as of right now. Yes, it will increase Lauma's personal damage, as well as obviously the other reactions, but if we also get a future Nod-Krai character who is Lunar Blooming, and all the signs point towards that we will get a Lunar Bloom carry, for example, then this constellation will gain value, as not only is the Lunar Bloom damage nice for Lauma, but it should also be really nice for this other Lunar Blooming character as well. For those reasons, it's a solid early stopping point even as of right now that I think will get better at future teams, because the reaction buff is good for all of the reactions, but it's even better for Lunar Bloom because of the additional effect in Ascendant Gleam. Next up for Lauma's C3 and 5, these will increase her talent levels, which is appreciated, and her C4 will allow her to gain a bunch of energy, which can help alleviate her energy recharge requirements. Lastly, for Lauma's C6, this is a huge wall of text that will basically just give you a lot of damage. You will get additional instances of Dendro damage through your skill, that will be Lunar Bloom damage, as well as also gaining Pale Hymn stacks, which are your burst stacks, as you're dealing this damage. Additionally, Lauma's normal attacks will now also deal more Dendro damage that will actually now scale with her elemental mastery, and that will be Lunar Bloom damage. This will consume a Pale Hymn stack and will basically enable her to be played as an on-field DPS if you choose to do so. Additionally, it will also elevate the Lunar Bloom damage of all of your party members by 25%, and I believe elevated is a new term that we haven't seen before. That is just a separate multiplier, and that will increase your Lunar Bloom damage significantly. This does seem like a nice C6, but obviously it is a C6. Overall, Lauma's a solid character even at C0, so you don't need any constellation. With that said, I think C2 will be the early stopping point that's decent for her current teams, but will likely be a lot better for the future Lunar Bloom ones. Outside of that, C1 is a weird one that's mainly just for comfort and a stepping stone for her C2. Alright, now with all that out of the way, let's talk about Lauma's best teams and synergies. Now, as we saw, Lauma is a character who synergizes very well with Bloom and its sub-reactions. Before we get into her existing teams, and there are quite a few, I do want to reiterate that her teams will likely expand as we get future characters from Nod-Krai. She will likely have more Lunar Bloom teams with future Dendro and Hydro characters, like potentially Nefer. There's also a chance that the Moon Goddess that she loves so much can work with her, but again, we don't know yet. I just want to mention this as a way of saying that Lauma's Lunar Bloom teams will likely get better with roster additions. For now though, Lauma does have some pretty incredible team options. Firstly, Lauma is a huge buff to Nilou teams. Nilou has always been good in AoE, and now not only is she better there, and Lauma is definitely her best teammate in my opinion, but also the damage of the blooms you're doing is so high that Lauma is even good in single target. Lauma Nilou teams are usually composed of Lauma, Nilou, and then a Dendro character and a Hydro one. You can either go for fast or slow Hydro. It's pretty flexible. There really is a lot you can do, provided that all of your slots are a mixture of just Hydro and Dendro. The most popular team is running another Dendro unit like Nahida, Traveler, Kole, or any form of off-field Dendro, and then a Hydro Bloom trigger who stacks elemental mastery to do as much damage as possible. Do note that in a Nilou team, you do want a healer to be able to stay alive, as your Bloom reaction will do some self-damage to your active character as well, but to my knowledge, it does seem that they nerfed how much damage you yourself are taking from your own blooms in this update. With that said, you still definitely want a healer or at least a shielder, so do keep that in mind. In a team like this though, the Dendro slot is flexible, and so is the Hydro one. Make sure you just have a healer. For Hydro, it's oftentimes a EM stacking Kokomi, but Barbara can work too as a free-to-play option. Both these characters are Hydro Hydro, healers, and Catalyst users, meaning that they can heal you up but also be used on field to apply as much Hydro as possible. Outside of that, you can also run a Dendro healer like Baiju or Yao Yao, and you can even opt for a faster form of Hydro application where you will no longer have like one dedicated bloom trigger, but it's usually fine as long as you are blooming as often as possible because you get so many buffs to the bloom reaction as well as to your elemental mastery through a bunch of different artifact sets, character buffs, and even the Dendro resonance. The sky really is the limit for what Dendro and Hydro characters you can use. Do note that Xingqiu in these teams is actually very valuable as a Hydro option you can run because he offers you very fast Hydro application as well as a bit of healing and damage reduction, which is genuinely really nice for these teams. On top of that, he can run a supportive artifact set like Deepwood or even a more offensive one, and you can actually try to build elemental mastery on a lot of your characters in this team if you don't have a dedicated bloom trigger like Kokomi, because you will kind of be triggering bloom on multiple characters like even Xingqiu. As while a standard Xingqiu build is still fine, being able to do more bloom damage through elemental mastery and a set like Flowers of Paradise Lost or Gilded Dreams can help increase your team DPS because Xingqiu will be applying so much Hydro. The Elan can work too, and so can basically any Hydro unit. I also wanted to mention that Kave teams are greatly buffed with Lauma, and he can work well here as an on-field driver for this bloom team, as he is someone who applies a good amount of Dendro and who has self-healing to allow himself to live past your bloom damage. Outside of that, if you don't have a on-field Dendro or Hydro character you're running in these teams, Lauma can be used as your on-field driver, as you've seen in the footage, where you basically can just use abilities on all of your characters and auto-attack on Lauma for as many Dendro cores as possible. I did want to also mention that if you have another healer, I know can work as your last slot as well, and while she removes the ability for your blooms to crit, she will instead buff your lunar bloom damage, which is okay but worse, but she does sort of make up for it by the fact that she will allow you to run the Nod-Krai artifact sets to a greater effect. Lauma can run the new DPS set, Ano can run the new support set, and you can have Deepwood on someone else in your team to get the most value out of the new artifact sets. For those reasons, she is actually a viable and free 4-star that I wanted to mention. Genuinely though, Lauma Nilu teams are very flexible. Just run 2 Dendro, 2 Hydro, and you'll have a very solid team. Outside of that, Lauma can also be played in Hyperbloom, either as the solo Dendro on field like driver, who can auto attack and constantly apply Dendro, but also who will be quick swapping around using your abilities on all of your characters off cooldown as often as you can. This is good for spamming elemental reactions and doing as much damage as possible on all of your team. This team is genuinely surprisingly strong and relatively straightforward to build and play. While this double Hydro core is an example for an on-field Lauma team, actual Hyperbloom is incredibly flexible. All you want is Lauma as your Dendro, and then a Hydro applier and an Electro Hyperbloom trigger who will be on full elemental mastery. This can be Kuki if you also want healing, or Raiden if you have her and want faster Hyperblooms. There are some other things you could do like running Inefa on a lot of EM, or even another Electro character with an Anemo who will be swirling Electro. The last slot is incredibly flexible, and there really are so many Hyperbloom teams that I've covered in many videos, and Lauma is a great addition and buffer to this team. Her Hydro and Dendro res shred are invaluable, and she can be played either on field or off field. While we're on the subject of Hyperbloom, Hydro carries can also Hyperbloom with Lauma, with Nevalet getting another one of his best teams, potentially actually his best team, with Farina, Lauma, and Inefa. Inefa obviously will make your Hyperblooms no longer crit because you're in Ascendant Gleam, but she makes up for it in the same ways that Ino does, but even more so because Inefa is actually just a great character who gives you Lunar Charge, a strong shield that's nice, especially for a C0 Nevalet, and great personal damage. Outside of that, Nevalet, Farina, and Lauma are just all really good. You get a bunch of different reactions, and Nevalet, while he won't have as much personal damage as a hyper carry team, will make up for it by having really high team DPS and reaction damage as well. Other Hydro units can all work either on field or off field in this team, and Electro carries can work as well with Lauma. Sino, for example, is a character that benefits from Lauma's release, being able to play Quick Bloom, a mix of Quicken and Hyper Bloom, with a fast Hydro applier, Lauma, and then a flexible last slot. Outside of that, you can also run an Alhaitham team with Lauma, where you're once again getting both Quicken and Hyper Bloom, and good damage on a lot of your different characters. Outside of that, Lauma can also be played in a Burgeon team, following the same structure as Hyper Bloom, but with a Pyro Burgeon trigger, who's stacking Elemental Mastery to do as much damage as possible. There are other characters that can trigger Burgeon, such as Dea, Pyro MC, Shangling, or even Mawika, with Toma being the sort of standard in these teams. Lastly, I did want to mention Lauma as a niche but surprisingly decent option in Kniich teams, where I wouldn't pull her just for Kniich, as she's obviously designed for Bloom and not like Burning, but Lauma being able to run Thrilling Tales, Deepwood Memories, and also offer you Dendro Res Shred through her skill makes her a viable unit in Kniich teams that doesn't even need to use her burst and can just give you some nice buffs. For those reasons, I wanted to mention it, as well as Lauma just being a strong character basically wherever you can fit her and wherever she can buff a Dendro or Hydro unit. Overall though, she synergizes the most with Bloom, Hyper Bloom, Burgeon, and Quick Bloom, as well as potential future Lunar Bloom bloom teams as well. Alright, now with that said, I'm now gonna get into a Lauma showcase in a few various teams, mainly with Bloom, Hyper Bloom, and also a clip with Nevalette that's technically Hyper Bloom as well. My Lauma is going to be on pretty standard stuff. She's C0, talent level 9 on her skill and burst, and for her weapon, I am only using Sacrificial Fragments, which is kind of just an EM stat stick because her event weapon isn't out yet and I'm not pulling for her signature. Keep in mind that there are better weapons as I mentioned, but I'm just waiting for her event to be here so I can get a better upgrade. For now though, just a 4-star EM stat stick is honestly perfectly fine, and I am running either Gilded Dreams in the Nilou Bloom team you will see, or Deepwood Memories in the other teams where she is solo Dendro. As for my build, I'm just kind of stacking Elemental Mastery and Energy Recharge with as much crit as I can get as a bonus on the substats. Keep in mind I do have some external buffs like Dendro Resonance, and it's gonna be a pretty standard showcase of my C0 Llama in the Spiral Abyss. Now keep in mind that as I'm editing this, the Abyss rotation actually changed, and so while I already have a full showcase of the last Abyss, I will actually include a clip in here as well of the newest Abyss that literally just changed. While I was going to remake this entire section, I think it's actually best not to, because the last Abyss was one where we had a buff to Electro Charge and Lunar Charge, which did help some of the teams were playing a bit, but the newest Abyss in the half where you want to play Lauma actually gives you a huge bloom damage buff, as you can see, which obviously makes Lauma and her teams much stronger, but in a way that I think makes the showcase a bit more unrealistic for future Abysses and just general content. For those reasons, given the fact that for once I kind of have the choice between two Abyss rotations to show off, I will be including clips of both, but primarily keeping the showcase from the last Abyss rotation that was more quote-unquote normal, even though we still got some buffs, and then include one clip at the end in the newest Abyss with bloom buffs that will make my Lauma and her bloom team much stronger. I hope that makes sense, and I hope you enjoyed the guide, and I hope you'll enjoy this showcase. Let's go.
With one heart, we pray. Witness the power. Things are about to get dicey. Terrified! Dissipate! Branches of song. Busted! With one heart, we pray. Be a good audience, Loki. Not done.
And so yeah, overall Lauma is a pretty incredible character, a really strong Dendro support, one who introduces a new reaction, and I'm honestly very excited to see what synergies she'll have with future units. With that said, I hope you enjoyed the guide, and as always, if there's anything new I want to add, it will be in a pinned comment, so be sure to check that. I hope this video was helpful, let me know what you want to see next, and as always, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.